My name is Mark Wu. I'm the director of the Fairbank Center and the Henry L. Stimson Professor of Law at Harvard University. So China faces three key challenges. The first is over the last couple of years, as the Chinese economy has slowed down, China has invested in a number of key strategic industries and ramped up manufacturing. China now has excess capacity in several of those different industries, so China needs export markets to absorb that excess capacity. China is finding that many of its key trading partners, not just the United States, but the European Union and other developing countries, are throwing up anti-dumping and other types of tariffs against those particular goods. The second challenge China faces is China's trading policies have been crafted assuming a stable WTO rules-based system. And so that system is coming under challenge itself right now as the WTO has been unable to reform and adapt its rules. And then the third challenge that China faces is with respect to the inflow of technology and investment into China. So over the last couple of years, countries have put in greater restrictions on technology flows, and companies themselves are facing greater anxiety about making investments. So all of this is made for a more difficult trade and investment sets of policies that China now confronts. Attitudes for China have changed dramatically over the last couple of years, in part because of fears of a second China shock due to China's expanded manufacturing capacity and the fears that this may now lead to job losses in advanced economies. We're seeing this not only in the United States, but we're seeing this in Europe with sectors like automotives, robotics, and so forth. We're also seeing this in developing countries where countries are concerned that China may be crowding it out of supply chains and its own abilities to be able to move up the value chain. In addition, there are concerns about China's ability and its intentions with regards to its geopolitical posture. So the Russia-Ukraine war has fueled concerns about China's alliances or China's close ties with certain strategic adversaries of China's trading partners, as well as China's own foreign policy posture in its immediate neighborhood in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits and so forth, have led to concerns that trade and investment may be fueling China's development of dual-use technologies that could be used in certain theaters in the future. One last element has been the pandemic itself, and that exposed the risk of supply chains disruptions, in particular the fact that the world is so dependent on China for certain supply chains. We saw this with masks and we're seeing this with rare earths and so forth, have led to people realizing that they need to engage in a greater de-risking strategy so that there are additional options that are available and they're not becoming increasingly reliant on China. So all of this has led to a dramatic shift in attitude towards a different trading partners' relationship with China over the last 5 years. At present, it seems unlikely that China is going to engage in any type of large-scale reform that would lead to changes in its economic development model and might cause these trade tensions to dissipate. So long as that's the case, China is going to engage very pragmatically in the global trade system. China will, to the extent that it serves its interest, try to preserve the status quo at the WTO, meaning that it won't necessarily support any type of large-scale reform that would hurt its economic interests. China will also continue to engage bilaterally, as it has over the last few years, through free trade agreements and other types of partnerships to try to maintain access to markets, to try to maintain its ability to attract the types of inputs as well as technology and investment that's necessary to keep China as the manufacturing hub of the world. And then finally, China will continue to push out initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative that seek to integrate the Chinese market with other global markets, particularly those outside of G7 countries. There are two key things that anyone interested in Chinese trade policy ought to know, which may not be obvious. The first is that domestic politics matter even in an authoritarian country. There are different interest groups, there are different firms, there are different agencies that are involved in shaping those policies. They don't necessarily all get resolved in the state itself, but some of these play out through the Communist Party. So the first thing to understand is the complexity of China's political economy, and in particular, the unique nature of the Chinese party-state mechanism that resolves these contestations across different interest groups. The second thing is the fact that the international landscape is likely to remain highly dynamic and uncertain over the next decade as the strategic rivalries play out between the US, China, and other key players. So much of international trade over the last quarter century has proceeded under a rules-based WTO-centric system. That's unlikely to be coming back in its original form over the course of the next decade. And so anyone who's interested in studying Chinese trade policy is going to need to understand how Chinese interests interact with the changing dynamic landscape at the international level.